Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's program, co-hosted by the Institute of Contemporary Art and AIGA Boston. I'm Monica Garza, the Charlotte Wagner Director of Education at the ICA. Today's program is part of an annual lecture series that has been running for 15 plus years. The series is an opportunity for us to highlight some of today's leading designers while also generally touching on some of the ideas highlighted in our current exhibitions. Today's program coincides with the ICA's exhibition, To Begin Again, Artists and Childhood. The exhibition investigates the influence of children and childhood on visual artists. This includes artists such as Paul Klee with his whimsical puppets, to Faith Ringgold with her figurative quilts and children's books. I invite you to learn more about the exhibition on the museum's website. In the meantime, I'd like to thank you all for joining us today. I also thank our guest speakers, as well as our collaborators from AIGA Boston, including Amy and Cliff, as well as ICA staff Eliza and Danny for making today's program possible. Now, with that said, I'd like to welcome our co-host from AIGA Boston, Amy Parker, to help introduce our guest speaker today. Thank you.
Welcome, everyone, and thank you, Monica. My name is Amy Parker. I serve on the board for the board of directors for AIGA, and I am the VP of programming. So this is a very exciting time for us to be collaborating with the ICA. AIGA, if for those folks who don't know, it's the Professional Association for Design, and it actually spans more than 70 chapters across the United States. So for the local Boston programming, we've found popularity in the annual VO mentorship program, the portfolio reviews, open air art walks, the freelance toolkit series, and of course, this annual lecture series is put on with the ICA of Boston. The collaboration with this highly praised institution, one of my favorite places in Boston, has enabled us to celebrate today's leading designers and thinkers. So I want to thank one of our chapter's advisors, Cliff Stoltz, who Monica mentioned. He makes this event happen every year for the past 15 years and counting. And our deepest gratitude does go out to Monica and her team for graciously working with us to make sure that all the details were, the T's were crossed and the I's were dotted to make sure that all this time that we have together is a success. The best way to hear about future ICA Boston and AIGA Boston lectures is actually to sign up for our newsletter on the boston.aiga.org and consider becoming a member to access professional development for your own career advancement. So today I am excited to introduce our moderator, Katherine Hughes, who will then introduce Jessica Hische, who is our featured speaker. Katherine is a design director at Stoltz Design Group, where she has spent over a decade working on a wide range of identity and publication projects. She has worked extensively with the Davis Museum at Wellesley College, Harvard Business School, MIT, and the Boston Society for Architects. Her passion for typography led her to teach at her alma mater, Rhode Island School of Design, and Massachusetts College of Art and Design, where she is now associate professor. So we're thrilled to have you here today, Katherine, and I will pass it on to you to now make Jessica's introduction and we'll get started. Thanks all.
Thank you so much for that introduction, Amy. I am so delighted to be here today. So I think one of my favorite parts of the Zoom lecture experience is when everyone comes into the space and says, hello from wherever they are, and you get to see all of the far-flung attendees. So in that spirit, I will just say that I am joining today from my office at Massachusetts College of Art and Design. And I also want to send a shout out to Cliff, who's already been mentioned, for coordinating this and many lectures at the ICA and for giving me this opportunity to introduce and speak with one of my favorite designers, Jessica Hische. So Jessica is a letterer, a designer, an illustrator, a letterpress printer, a mom of three, a type nerd, a jumpsuit connoisseur, and the New York Times bestselling author of two stunningly lettered children's books, Tomorrow I'll Be Brave and Tomorrow I'll Be Kind. And this gorgeous book that I highly recommend if you have any interest in lettering, which really leads you through the process of creating gorgeous hand-drawn letters. She has collaborated with a roster of incredible clients, including Wes Anderson, Dave Eggers, Bon Appetit, the New York Times Magazine, Penguin Books, the US Postal Service, and so many more. It was really hard to choose the ones to highlight in this introduction. Her work has been widely recognized in every corner of the graphic design universe, and all of it is infused with an exuberance and sharp wit that keeps us excited to see what will come next. Jessica, it is such a delight to welcome you today.
And it is a delight to be here. Hi, everybody. This is so fun. This has been a long time in the making. Really stoked to be here talking to you guys today. And this is so fun because I had to make like a whole new deck because I've never actually done like a talk about transitioning into being an author. So you guys get some fresh material, which is fun. The really exciting thing that we'll talk about today is I'm going to show you guys a sneak peek of my new kids book that's coming out in April. And by sneak peek, I mean, I'm going to show you the whole thing, which I have not asked permission from Penguin for. So hopefully they're fine with. We're not going to read it. And I said, we can't put the recording up until after the book comes out. But either way, I'm really excited to share it because it was a long time in the making and it's really different from my other books. And just really excited to talk about it. So let me just go ahead and dive in to my screen share. All right. So hello, my name is Jessica Hische. I'm a lettering artist, as Katherine said. I do a lot of other things, but I think primarily that's my professional self at this point. But I, of course, love to tinker in lots of different things. And I am Jessica Hische in most places on the internet. You can find me there too often because I have a terrific addiction to social media. My love of books started early, but not because of reading, but because of the pictures. I definitely was a person who judged books by their covers and interiors. I was not a great reader growing up. Like I was a kid that mostly was drawing all the time. Like if you gave me free time, my free time was always drawing. And I knew I was going to be an artist. I now have 3 little kids. My little guy who's 3.5, he tells me all the time that he's an artist. He's going to grow up to be an artist. And that's like his goal. But my daughter who's 7 is like a crazy reader. She's reading at a 5th grade level and just, it's the only thing she ever wants to do. And I'm so envious of that because as a kid, you like couldn't force me to read books, but you could force me very easily to look at the photos. So Graham Bass's books were one of like the early ones that I was really obsessed with as a kid. His book Animalia, which I believe this one's from, and there were 2 other books that we had. I just loved the illustrations so much and would get lost in the details. And it was probably one of my first really early introductions to illustrative lettering. Just because not a lot of kids' books have lettering in them. For one thing, it makes it really difficult to do translations for different countries. You basically have to redo the artwork, which is what I learned with my own books. And so it's a little hard to push a book with lettering in it through to publishers, just because it is a little harder to move into different markets or to sell in different places. But I loved this book so much and I loved the pictures as much as I loved the lettering. If you asked me at the time if that was my thing I was going to be into, I would be like, I don't know, like I didn't actually really discover lettering until much later in my life. But being an illustrator is something that once I was out of college, I was like, this is it. This is what I want to be. Rainbow Fish was another early influence, not because of the story, which I literally could not tell you what it's about, but because I could just stare at these like random foil stamped scales all day long. I feel like ooh, shiny syndrome is something I suffer from in a big way. I'm just a big mockingbird that just wants to, or what's the one that collects funny, fancy things? It's not that. We'll cover that later. But I still, to this day, like you want to put rainbows on stuff, you want to put sparkly stuff on things, I'm all for it. And I'm always like convincing people to use those weird 80s foils on things if I can help it. And I feel like this book was a big influence in that way. That said, like, I didn't think I was going to end up being a children's book illustrator. It wasn't like my dream as a child. I don't know why. I just was like, I want to make paintings, but it didn't really enter into my thought that like I would make art for books. And even just like finding my way into illustration took some time because, you know, I went to school for fine art and then ended up in graphic design because I loved it. But then sort of found my way back into creating images through graphic design because I would make illustrations and lettering for my graphic design projects. So a big part of that is like illustration just really appealed to me because I love to be able to have like a brief to jump off at. to jump off from in order to start a project. If I don't have that, I get like blank page syndrome and just can't get started. And so illustration was really the way for me to be an artist, but to actually have a thing to make art for just laid out right in front of me. So some of my earliest experiences with book design were I interned at a place called Headcase Design in Philadelphia. I wish I could send you guys to their website, but it's like been in progress for literally 13 years or something. So their Flash website is still up in some archive. Unfortunately, it doesn't work on any of my computers, but I was going to show you some of the early work that's still on there, but this was one of the most memorable projects that I did at the time. So they, Headcase was sort of equally split between doing book projects, like really, really big book projects, and then editorial illustration. And so I worked on a lot of the book projects while I was there because so much of it was just like labor, just a ton of labor to work on them. They did a lot of books for Melcher Media, like the Wicked book. But for this one, we had to go through all of Courtney Love's diaries and loose leaf sheets and photographs and Polaroids and turn them into what looked like a final version of a book. So each page was a massive Photoshop document with multiple things, multiple artifacts on each page. And we had to isolate all the text and reflow it on different pages of loose leaf and whatever, because just to like fit things in and like create a narrative with all the stuff. So it's one of those things like I'm actually kind of anti sketchbooks that are like artist sketchbooks because they're really like every page is like a painting. And I'm like, that's not a sketchbook. A sketchbook should be messy. It should have like recipes in it and like random scribbles and like notes from meetings or whatever. But this was like us making like, what is her idealized journal? But it was really neat, you know, looking at like naked photos of rock stars and stuff like that. And, you know, and each, you know, this was in 2006 or maybe 2005, because I think I did it while I was working on it while I was still in school or very shortly after. So giant Photoshop files at the time were like very churny to run on the computer. And this book was like 200 giant PSD files in a Quark document, probably. But the other thing that was really neat about working there is I got to work on, we worked on the Sopranos book, which I couldn't find like a good photo of the cover. I don't think the cover was the most fantastic part of the book. I think it was one of those, like the publisher pushed it through. But when the Sopranos was still filming at the time, so I got to go on set of one of the last episodes of the Sopranos in Long Island City and like meet some of the staff, and Uncle Junior put his glasses on my face. I wish I had photos, but this was like the time of like that weird transition from like film to digital cameras where all the digital cameras were really shitty and not everybody had one. It was pre-iPhone, you know, so alas, it's just a memory, but a very, very fun memory of early on in my career. I started doing book covers pretty early on. And I think part of it was just that I was able to combine like my skills as being like a custom fonts person, which is not what it was. I wasn't making fonts, but that's what I called it at the time because I didn't have the right lingo, with illustration. So book covers were like a really natural way for that to manifest, just because so often they combine both of those things. And a lot of the illustrators that I admired that combined illustration and hand lettering were doing a lot of book cover work. Like I had one of my good friends at the time, still a friend, Chris Silas Neal. He was doing a bunch of book cover work that had integrated hand lettering plus his illustration. Joel Holland was another one whose work I really loved. And Kelly Blair, another designer who's like a book cover designer, she was always really good about incorporating illustration and custom type onto her covers. And so this was, I think, probably the first commissioned book cover I made for a publisher in Philadelphia called Running Press. And these were some other early covers that I worked on, two for the same author and another one for a separate author. So my illustration style really shifted over time. It started by looking very like cut paper and had a lot of dimension and texture. And part of that was just because if you just put a bunch of textures and stuff on your work, it immediately looks okay. So it was sort of like prepping my canvas. So I put like this same paper texture on everything and start with background colors and things like that. And it made me feel more comfortable working when I had those textures in place rather than just have it be more stark and clean. So really like the more mature I've become in my art, the cleaner and more simpler my art has become rather than becoming more complex, because I feel more comfortable making like simple, beautiful things that don't need a bunch of zhuzhing around them in order to be impressive. You know what I mean? Yeah. So now a lot of the work that I do for books, I get commissioned to do just lettering while there's photography or illustrations by other people. At the time, I had no idea this was like a thing. So my friend Phil, who I knew from Tyler, who was a few years older than me, but worked at, I believe this was through Scholastic, hired me to do this lettering that was going to be used on a series that he was working on. They ended up simplifying it a lot, but this was the lettering that I had shown initially. And so this was like probably my first commission for doing just lettering for a book. And this was one of my favorite early commissions. So I ended up being able to illustrate or to do lettering on a bunch of romance novel covers, which was really, really fun and really exciting. And it's, I mean, I love kitsch, and I love sort of like being able to do stuff that's a little like tongue-in-cheek and weird. And so this was, I was like showing this to anybody who would see it, just because I was so happy to have worked on a romance novel cover. Working with big authors was something that happened like relatively early, but not often. So like this cover that I did for Elizabeth Gilbert was a huge effing deal for me. You know, like most of the, again, I wasn't like a crazy reader. Like I read a ton of articles and like long form articles. And now I read way more books, but I think because I'm a bit of a slow reader, I have never been someone that just like pleasure reads all the time, because it just takes me forever to get through texts. And I end up just sort of like losing interest halfway through and abandoning books. But when I was working on this, I was just like, holy F, this is a really big deal, because I'm working with this huge author. It wasn't that far after Eat, Pray, Love. And being able to do this, it just felt like suddenly I had leveled up. But I, you know, for the most part, most of the authors that I work with are like, you know, folks that are well known, but not necessarily like rock stars. The only really prominent author that I work with quite a bit is Dave Eggers. So I've been able to work with him on a number of projects, both for his individual books that he writes. So I did the cover for The Circle, I didn't design the jacket and cover, but I did the logo that's in the center of it, that mark, which was actually one of the early explorations for The Circle. So I did a huge, like, let's try 20 different options for the Every, and they ended up just like going back to one of the early ones for The Circle. And Hologram for the King. And I did a few other book covers that ended up like getting transitioned into other things, but I work on a lot of projects for McSweeney's under Dave's art direction. So he's really fun to collaborate with, and is like, has such like a funny way of working, because he doesn't use the internet. Like when he's writing, he has to stay away from the internet. So when I'm working on a book cover, he has to drive to like the laundromat near his house to use the Wi-Fi in the parking lot in order to give me direction. So I have like a 6-minute window of talking to him that day. So you cannot accidentally miss that meeting, because then you got to wait like another day or two, and you had your famous author person drive to the laundromat to talk to you. But it's really fun working with people whose work you admire. You know, like of the books that I've read, like, you know, I've read a lot at this point just because of all the covers that I've done. But I really like, for pleasure reading, I really loved pleasure reading his books, and it just feels really fun to be in his circle. Many moons ago, probably in 2009, I did my first cover for Barnes & Noble, which ended up turning into this massive series, not because it ever was meant to be, but just they came back over and over again for different titles. And so I've done, I think, 26 books for Barnes & Noble for their Leatherbound Classics series. They might have a different title at this point for the series, but they still sell them. You can find them online. They're not in these colorways. These are the colorways that I have newly assigned to them, because I just did a massive letterpress print edition of all of the books, which I have not launched on my website yet, but will be doing so shortly. And these have been really fun, because again, like when I was younger, I wasn't a massive reader. And also I went to Catholic school for most of my early education, and then switched to public school for the last 2 years of high school. But what ended up happening is, like, when I was at Catholic school, my freshman and sophomore year of school were really about like very intense grammar and learning about sentence structure and stuff. We did so much sentence diagramming, which I loved. I'm like obsessed with diagramming sentences. But then as they were about to transition from that to literature, I switched schools right when that school was transitioning from literature to creative writing. So I basically skipped literature. I like read The Scarlet Letter 2 times and like maybe like Beowulf or something, but I didn't read a lot of these classics in high school. So it was really wonderful to have an opportunity to read them as an adult. And reading books as an adult is a totally different experience than reading books as a teen, because as a teen, you're so self-obsessed. You're just looking for like yourself in the story all the time. And as a grown-up, you can really get lost in the story and like visualize other people experiencing things. My daily drop cap project really launched a bunch of my creative career, like, you know, just having a daily practice of making a letter every day. This was eons before the 360 or like the 365 days projects, or like the whatever, the however many days of type that people do, the 36 days of type, that's what it is. But this ended up turning into a big, massive book cover project for Penguin, because Paul Buckley, who I had collaborated with on a few other covers, reached out about doing like an artist collaboration series in which I would do 26 covers, and each cover had a big illustrative drop cap on it. And so this was like just a super fun project, and every letter was very, very conceptual. So like I had to read like, you know, the whole story or a lot of the story, and then like really get in deep to the details, trying to make sure that like people would really get the references that I was doing. And it wasn't just the most stereotypical stuff you could imagine. You know, some of them I had to go like a little bit more surface level, like Proust, you know, so much of it is just about that experience with the Madeleine. So making the P out of the steam and the T. And then some of them like are a little bit more like cerebral. So like for this one, for Great Expectations, it's for Dickens, and it's about, you know, the main character's like life is very simple, but he dreams of this fancy life, but then realizes that the simple life was actually kind of fine. So sort of combining like simplicity and elaborate fancifulness to convey the plot of that book. But becoming an actual author took time, you know, like when I didn't think like, oh, I'm definitely going to write a book about my process, or I'm going to write whatever. I did a lot of writing about my process and sharing of tools and tips and tricks on the internet, just because I was like, I loved sharing about things when I learned how to do them, because I would just get really excited about it and be like, oh, I feel like I've unlocked something and I want to share that unlock with other people. And I think early on, I learned that as long as you share from your own lived perspective, you're kind of like criticism proof, you know, like people that go on the internet and try and be like, I'm the best at this thing, here's the only way to do it. People will just jump down their throats and be like, excuse me, but you're 24. There's plenty of other people that have had this thought before. But when you come out into the world and you say, hey, like, here's how I learned to do this thing, it might be helpful to you. Like, here are other resources. And you just sort of spread it around and just be like, hey, this won't work for everyone, but it worked for me. Like, and I feel like learning from people that were 1 or 2 steps ahead of me was always really helpful. That's what really started my desire to write about my process, was just sort of like understanding that learning from peers or peers that are just a step or 2 ahead can be really useful. And also understanding that like sharing lived experience is something that you can always feel comfortable doing, that you don't have to be like, I'm going to be the authority on this thing in order to, or I'm going to be an expert in order to share. Like, you have expertise in your own lived experience, and that's always worth sharing. But this book originally, like Chronicle approached me to do like a coffee table book compendium of my work, just because they were like, you have followers on the internet and we know that you'll sell books. Here you go. And I mean, that's like a simplification, but it's not wrong. It was really the blog to book era, where people were contacting anyone that had a successful blog and being like, let's make a book about it. Like that was definitely the initial conversation about this, but I was really young at the time. Like, I'm still young, I guess, because I'm only 38, but at the time it was 2015. So I was just turning 30, I guess. And I was like, this is not the time for me to make like a, you know, here's the compendium of my career. You know, my career was only a few years old in my eyes. And so I was like, let's just do it like loosey-goosey, just show some sketches, show some finals. People will like it. People like seeing process. And I started thinking about it that way, of just like, let's just take my sketches, scan them, throw them in a book, whatever. But then as I got my contract back from Chronicle, it was like, it started out as like, you can't use any of this work in another printed book ever again. And we argued it down to like, you can't use this work in another printed book for 10 years. And once those words sort of like started hitting home for me, I was like, oh man, like this book needs to be way more than just me like throwing it together. Because if I'm not going to be able to like put another book together for 10 years of all of this early career work, I really want this thing to be like something real and something special. So my initial like ask from them was to write like 2,000 words of an intro and then have the rest of it just be art. But I ended up sort of making a hybrid textbook and showcase of my work where I'm really talking through a lot of the process and giving a lot of tips and tricks about how to actually make lettering and art and what it means and what the different nuances within the typographic world are. And so like, if it wasn't for that contract, this book wouldn't exist, because it really pushed me to like, be like, oh shoot, I should make something that's going to last a little bit longer than just like, here's an easy coffee table book. So the whole beginning part of the book is all basically like a little mini textbook. And then I give lots of tips and tricks on vectorization and stuff too, which not a lot of books existed at the time that were doing that. It was really just about doing more analog work. And then in the work section, showing the finals of projects and then the sketches leading up to it and talking about the process of working on those. But the biggest impact on my publishing career was definitely when I had my daughter. I, again, like didn't really have like big dreams of being a children's book author, but part of it is just because I don't like to work on things that I don't understand. Like every side project that I've ever done has been like me repackaging and regurgitating something that I feel like I suddenly have a lot of authority about. So I'm just like, ooh, I just learned this thing. I know a lot about it. I need to rewrite it. I need to put it out there and like put my spin on it because I feel like now I get it. And before I didn't get it. And maybe my way of thinking about it is something that people will also understand. And so, and that's always been how I learn, you know, like when I studied for art history classes and things like that, the way that I actually studied would just be to rewrite my notes over and over again in different ways. Like I would basically just edit down my notes and rewrite them manually, on like one sheet of paper or something. And I didn't have to study except for replicating what I had learned into a written form. And so it's really common for me to like learn a thing and then immediately want to make a project about it, just so that I can like solidify that in my own mind and then also share it with other people, because I feel like I love making resources for other people and feeling like a useful human. So when I had my daughter and suddenly was reading like tons of books, I was like, oh, I feel like I understand this now. I understand that anybody that wants to make a kid's book should make a kid's book, because parents need like thousands of kids' books, and there needs to be a book about literally everything. And there needs to be 6 books about everything. Actually, there needs to be 20 books about everything, because like if you're trying to teach something to a child, hammering in that thought over and over again in different ways really does it. And you're just looking for tools, you're looking for escapes, you're looking for good stories. And I just felt like I had permission all of a sudden to make kids' books and to work in that space because I had a better understanding about it. Now I have 3 kids, so I'm like a secret big family mom. I mean, you guys know because I put it out there on the internet, but when I meet random strangers and they're like, you have 3 kids, it turns into a whole thing. They're like, what? Now I know nothing about you. What's your deal? But these are them like last weekend. Everybody's making amazing faces in this photo, especially my daughter, who is now, she's 7, but she's like secretly like 35, just trapped in a 7-year-old's body. But when she was about 4, that's when I really started thinking about making more kids' books, or like kids' books in the first place. I started seeing a lot of myself in her, which is like so common for parents, like you are reliving your own childhood in a way by watching your kid grow up. And I just remember how shy I could be, and also like how focused I was on doing things right and getting things right the first time, and how afraid of failure I was, and how like being afraid of failure and not doing things right would like sometimes prevent me from trying things, just because I really wanted to be good. I wanted to be good at things. So I tended to like focus on things that I knew I had like a natural talent for, rather than experimenting and knowing that failure is cool. And so when I initially had my ideas for Tomorrow I'll Be Brave and Tomorrow I'll Be Kind, it started by just being like, what are the traits that I want my kid to want to aspire to be when they grow up? And what are the way, how can I like really like strengthen her as a person? And so I made like a spreadsheet and made a bunch of, this sort of how I work. I'm just like a researcher and dump everything into spreadsheets. I love spreadsheets. And came up with, like 25 or so, like positive affirmation words that I like really loved, but I started seeing that they could be like grouped in different ways. And the main groupings that ended up emerging were ways that you want to be better for yourself, that just are about enriching your own life, and then ways that you want to be better to enrich the lives of others. So it's sort of like that metaphor, that really common metaphor of like, you have to put on your own, safety thing on the airplane before assisting others, like take care of yourself before you assist others, because that's really true. Just to be able to assist others, you have to be in a place of strength, and you have to be in a good place in order to be able to like really successfully help other people. So that's why those two books existed, and Brave came out first. It's all about like being empowered, and then Kind is all about like, what can I do now that I feel awesome to help other people? And so the way, it's a real hybrid of illustration and lettering. It's almost like kind of every other, these aren't all the spreads in the book, but there are a lot of the spreads in the book. And so it goes through these words and sort of gives like real life examples of how these things apply to your life, which I find like, some kids are good, like totally imagining these weird metaphorical situations and like pulling the meaning out of things. And some just need it hammered in, just like really straightforward, like, and this is why you're nice to people at the playground. But this was also like a way for me to get back into doing more illustration, because at the time my work had gotten so simple and so geared towards lettering only that I wasn't doing a lot of like illustrative lettering anymore and incorporating illustration into my lettering work. And I felt very rusty. So it was really nice to be able to sort of like dive back into it and try to find like a voice with my illustration again that was really different from my early work, because again, I wasn't using all these paper textures and whatever to like make it feel interesting and fancy. And then Kind, I feel like I can really personally tell the difference in the artwork between Brave and Kind, in just like how much more comfortable I felt as an illustrator between the two books. So Brave, I love, it definitely is like the better seller of the two books. And it like, I just hear from like endless parents about how it's like their default gifting book. And it's found a real home with like certain communities, like parents that have kids that have a lot of medical problems that have to go into the hospital often, like this has really found a home with NICU nurses, and also parents of autistic kids, because they felt like this book spoke to their kid in a way that other books didn't, because really the whole premise of the book is like self-forgiveness. So it's like, here, let's try to be this thing. But then the end of the book is like, here are all the things we tried to do, like, but we weren't all the things, we'll try again tomorrow. It's meant to sort of like teach, like be this, almost like prayer-like thing at the end of the day, that sets you up for success the next day by setting intentions, but forgives the fact that like you weren't able to achieve everything, and you never will be able to achieve everything. And that's totally cool. So that's like the whole point of Brave, which is why it's resonated so much with, so many different kids and parents. And then Kind is really like so good for as a toolkit for when you're starting to teach about being a good human. So I've had a lot of teachers reach out that it's been really helpful in kindergarten and first grade when they're really starting to talk about a lot of these concepts and what it means to be honest and what it means to be, generous to people, and what generosity and gratefulness means. Gratitude practices are like really big with little kids, trying to get them to like be present in the now. And so it's really nice to see these two books find audiences in slightly different ways. But my new book, which is the last thing I'll show you today, is totally different. It's called Who Will You Be? I think all my books are kind of grow as my kids grow. Like maybe I'll end up making graphic novels or something at some point, just because I'm like, I just want to make a book that my kids want to read. And then they never do when I make it. They're just like, that's boring and for babies or whatever when it comes out. But it's just because I beta test on them too much and they're like over it by the time it hits the shelves. But Who Will You Be is like a legit story. So it's like, it follows this group of little letters in Alphabet City in New York, and I'll walk through all the spreads, that have a find yourself field trip day where they have to go out onto the streets of New York and meet other letters doing real big jobs to figure out who they want to be when they grow up. And so the style of this book is really different than my other books, and it kind of happened out of necessity, just because it's so much more complicated in terms of how much lettering is in it, that I couldn't do everything as vector. It just would have taken me years to make. So having a lot of the book be hand-drawn came partially from necessity, and also because I really wanted to sort of like expand my style and have my kids' book stuff be able to evolve into different spaces and try different things, and not just always feel so like graphic designy. So one thing that you'll notice is that all the characters are vector, but their facial features are hand-drawn. And then whenever they're talking to a letter in the book, that letter is drawn in vector. And whenever it's like a background element, it's more hand-done. And so these are the end papers, which are all our main character, you, in all of her different possible roles in the world. And this was like one of the most fun things to draw. And it was basically like me being Daily Drop Cap all over again, but just for one letter. And our title page here, and I drew my little kids as our C and G over there for my dedication. And so it starts off again in Alphabet City, where we see the little letters going into their classroom. So it's sort of a world within a world, sort of Harry Pottery, but we don't talk about Harry Potter anymore. But, you know, sort of this idea that these letters exist among humans, but the humans don't really pay attention to them. They're not like interacting. It's just sort of like a separate world entirely. It does have a little bit of typographic instruction in it, which is just really a thing for the designers. There's a lot of little Easter eggs in the book. You know, I'm a big fan as a reader when there's stuff for the grownups as much as there is stuff for the little kids. So we learn about what it's like to be a letter in school, and it says it's not so different than what you do in your school. And then they take attendance by singing the alphabet song, of course. And there's you know, a few other characters in here that, like, Sigma is visiting from Greece. So we've got a foreign exchange student in there as well. And then we introduce the field trip project. Everybody's so excited and runs out into the world. And when they look up into their city for the first time with new eyes and see letters everywhere that they never really thought about before, it's really a moment to, like, this is me teaching what lettering is to little kids, is just like, look all around you. People draw these letters. These letters exist. It's not just the same letter everywhere. Isn't that neat? You know, and just really, once you start being able to notice things in the world, you have a totally different understanding about different art forms and things like that. I mean, I'm sure a lot of us as designers have had that experience when you start being told like what's good and what's bad, and then suddenly you can't unsee like everything in the world. And so having that experience of just being like, wait a second, people draw this, you know, is really big. We're not talking about drawing in this book, but even just the existence of like different alphabets is really interesting to little kids. And then we go through different kinds of roles that alphabets can have. Like in this case, they're talking about wayfinding and working in wayfinding, and how you can't be like super fancy, and you got to be straightforward, easy to read, love keeping people safe, you know, like kind of talking about like all the pros and cons of each of the jobs. This one, they talk to a letter on a band t-shirt about life on the road in a stinky van, and, you know, trying to throw in some humor about touring with a band and things like that. When they're on the subway, this is a gatefold page, so it opens up to Times Square. So this is like a closed page, and then it opens up and you have like the biggest lettered spread in the book. And in this one, it's meant to be that overwhelming moment when suddenly you're like, wait a second, I didn't realize that this was all out here in the world for me to see. Like, what am I going to do? Like, there's so many things, and have a bunch of like fun Easter eggy things in this. Of course, there's like Dad Rock Cafe. There's some musical things like Less Miserable, and this extremely New York specific joke, which is North Side Story. North Side is a car service in Brooklyn that when you call, they just go 5 minutes, and they like, it feels like you didn't even tell them where you are. They just know. So North Side Story is West Side Story, but North Side, the car service. So that one only the New Yorkers will get, but it made me laugh when I drew it, and laughing at your own jokes is something that I'm very good at. They meet a letter on Broadway and talk about seeing your name in lights and how you can always dream about that, but also how hard it is to be on all the time. And I did a little drawing of me and my 3 kids here. So they love pointing themselves out in books. Like sometimes I'll put things in books specifically because I want them to see it and like freak out about it. So there's a few like Easter eggs that my kids have like stores named after them and stuff like that. And then their next stop is the New York Public Library. They talk about the letters on the outside first, for just like being there for more than 100 years and what they've seen. And then obviously like libraries are full of letters doing different jobs. And so I loved this spread. I actually snuck into like the Rose reading room and like sat there and was doing sketches and taking some very incognito photos of the main branch of the New York Public Library so that I can replicate it in the book. And so this book was like visual ASMR for me to make, just because so much of it is like me doing little teeny tiny drawings, like drawing every single one of these books. But what I would do is the way that I worked for this is I would do sort of a loose sketch and then draw the structure in Illustrator just as black outlines, and then bring that into Procreate and trace it as the structure, because I'm too like much of a perfectionist to just loosely draw things. But then letting myself freehand a lot of the detail work so that there is more of like a hand-drawn part to it, while still being able to be like symmetrical and having the lines be relatively straight and not having all the window sizes be funky and whatever. They talk to a letter on the inside of a book and talk about all the different roles that you can have in books, in manuscripts with golden letters, comics full of punchy action verbs. And then I do a little nod to my Tomorrow I'll Be Brave book about how awesome it is that words and pictures play together perfectly in kids' books. And then the very last stop that they do is they end up seeing a sculpture made of letters on the street that's modeled after Robert Indiana's Hope sculpture that's there, which is, another version of his love sculpture, but you can't draw other artists' work in your book, especially Robert Indiana's work, apparently. So I had to make up my own Hope sculpture here. But this is all about how like words don't just convey like the literal meaning of things, they can convey feeling and really like bring up an emotional response in you. And this is all just about how like you emotionally responded to the art, and that like it's crazy that something as simple as a letter can like bring that up in people and really resonate. So they take the bus back down to school and are back home so they can think about what they're going to present about the next day. And you like saw so much, she doesn't know what she's even going to talk about. But then all the letters give their presentation. So S had dreams of headlining at the ballet. F planned to travel the world on a postage stamp, and I draw my own postage stamp in there. So again, like this is such a vanity project, I'm sorry. And then M wanted to be forever emblazoned above an elbow. And then R wanted to be somewhere creepy, like a cemetery. The T joke was one of my favorite ones because it's like a parent friendly joke about T wanted to work in computers, and everyone agreed that would be a very smart choice. And then it was U's turn to share. And when she shares, she goes through all the different things that she learned over the course of the day by seeing all the different, different letters in their context. But then the real message is that all you have to be is you, like listen to your heart about what you want to be, and that you have your whole life to figure it out. You don't have to do it when you're a kid. But then it ends with this little wink of maybe she'd give children's books a try since she's the star of this children's book. So that's all. That's my new book. You guys got the first official preview, which is really exciting and fun. And hopefully I don't get in trouble for it, but it was fun for me. So yeah, now me and Katherine can give it a go.
Hello again. Thank you so much. That was just really delightful to see. And I think everyone is probably as charmed and thrilled to have seen your work and to hear about your process. I feel like there's so many threads that we could start our discussion with. I do want to make sure that I open it up to the audience and say, if you have any questions or comments, please feel free to use the Q&A so that I can ask them to Jessica. But I think one thing that really struck me as you were talking that I would love to start with is that you have amazing tone when you present. And I feel like it really permeates your books as well. It's like funny and charming and irreverent. And I'm just curious how you developed that voice. And if there have ever been times that you really had to push back or fight to maintain your perspective or the way that your tone comes across in your work.
Well, they're definitely, I feel like the way that I write is the way that I talk, but it's just like a more refined way of me talking, because this is going to be closed captioned, but you're going to have to do a lot of edits captions afterwards. Because what's funny is I feel like I have a lot of like energy when I'm speaking, because I really amp myself up. I'm like my own biggest like hype woman. But because of that, I end up talking in a lot of like fragmented sentences, and it's kind of all, and and like jumping around on topics, just because I kind of go where my brain wants to travel. But yeah, I think like giving myself permission to be that way took a little bit of time. Just because I do feel like when I was first starting to share about my work on the internet, especially, I would be very enthusiastic about something that I was working on and just be like, wanted to share about it, be like, oh my God, check out this cool thing. I'm so pumped about it, whatever. And even close friends would be like, hey, Jess, like, watch your tone. That could be a little braggy, or that could be a little this. And like, people would try to sort of reel back my enthusiasm. But it wasn't the majority of people. It would just be like people that clearly were more self-conscious about sharing in that way, because generally I didn't get a lot of pushback from like people that didn't know me, like people that didn't know me were like, look at you, so effervescent, la, 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 so it was really like friends trying to protect me from like people that didn't exist. But so I'm grateful for it, because they were like, they had my heart in mind. But sort of being able to get past that and sort of look at it and be like, actually, people aren't mad at me for being excited. So I think it's okay. And then I was really lucky with I've been really lucky in general with the editors that I've worked with in books, where, especially In Progress, like I love my editor for In Progress, Kate. She was really good at making sure that I didn't share things that would be regrettable in the future, but at the same time, like didn't try to like change my way of making up words, or like, like combining things together that aren't actually grammatically correct, just because it is how I talk. She didn't edit out all of my weirdsies from it, which was great. And like kind of knew how important the tone was. And I think like people are very hungry for conversationally written technical things, or like, stuff that conveys a lot of information, but is written in a way like a friend telling it to you. It's why things like Malcolm Gladwell books are like so popular, because they're like written in a much more plain, like, here's your friend explaining to you way, rather than it being this like very technical, heady thing.
Absolutely. Yeah, it sounds like finding the person who's willing to trust you with that voice too is really important as you move forward with your career.
Or just being like really stupidly self-confident, which is much easier when you're younger. So like, I like recommend everybody write a book when they're like 23, because you're just going to be like, this is amazing, I've never done anything better. And then once you're like 35, you're like, maybe I shouldn't do this,
Well, and when you have children to keep you humble too, right? Like you talked about how your daughter's starting to act like a 35-year-old, or maybe previously you said she's a little bit of a teenager. I feel like my kids are just getting to that point where they're like, you are being embarrassing. Please don't do that. And I'm like, oh no. No,
I feel like no, it's my job to make everybody in my family be cool with being embarrassed. Like Russ, my husband, is like very Southern, or he was like, when we knew each other or when we first met, he's like much more like quiet, and he's an introvert, and he's very social and everything, but he would get so embarrassed by me when I would be like dancing on the subway platform to try to make him like feel uncomfortable or whatever. And eventually he just kind of gave up and was just like, okay. And so I'll like I'm sure me sharing about very intimate details of our life was like very uncomfortable at first, and it just became something that I, like got him used to.
Have you ever heard the theory that one person in the relationship is the pole and the other person is the flag, and there always has to be that balance?
Oh yeah. I mean, well, there's so many, like I know so many people where somebody's the extrovert and somebody's the introvert. Like we make jokes that I'm like his friend vetting system, because like he's happy just hanging out with me and being at home and like tinkering on his guitar and making whatever. And he would never make new friends if I wasn't like, look, here's a friend I made. It's your new friend. Welcome.
He followed me home. I think you should be friends with him.
Yeah, exactly. Excellent. But I feel like I have a much higher bar for who I bring home to him now. Like at first I was like, everybody's great, you're going to love this person. He's like, are you even like talking to them, or are you just excited to meet new people? But now I feel like I only bring people home to him if I'm like, you're really going to get along with this person.
Excellent. Excellent. Well, it sounds like your next book after the one that is currently coming out should be Tomorrow You Can Be Embarrassed or something like that.
Oh yeah, something like that. Tomorrow you can dance in the streets.
Yes. So one of the other things I feel like that came out in this part of the conversation is how your kids have influenced what you're doing and how they've changed your process. And I'm going to read something that really, really resonated with me when you said it on the internet. I'm sure that there were many people who also felt this way. It was a tweet back in 2021, and you said, the key as a parent is just making sure your creative pilot light never goes out. The system is running on energy save for a while. There will be a time when you can crank it again, and it's easier to turn it up if it's not entirely extinguished. And I didn't shed tears when I read it, but I felt so seen, and I was so relieved to know that other people were having that experience as well. And I know it resonated enormously with other people who have young kids. So I'm curious what that looks like for you. How do you keep your pilot light going?
I'm vibing on your so like gotta make sure I'm like really a mirror neurons person. So welcome to my emotional life, just constantly being invaded by everybody's emotions in very positive ways. But yeah, I mean, I feel like there was just so much hustle culture. It's getting a little bit better now, where I feel like people are talking about how you actually have to take care of your body in order to be like a successful creative. But, you know, when I was first starting out, and I feel like this is always the case with like young designers, is it's just like, you've got to grind, you've got to work 90 hours, la, la, la. And it's a really tough transition to go from being told that's how you have to work to be successful to being like, I can work 30 hours a week and that is it. And like, you know, and also sometimes not because someone's sick today or someone has a dentist appointment or like whatever. And there's a really tough transition with like feeling like all of your emotional health and value and well-being is tied into being like really busy professionally to being more comfortable embracing like other parts of yourself and your personality and your life, and knowing that that's also really important to make you who you are. But another thing that kind of informed that pilot light thing as well is that when I moved from New York to California, people just didn't even know that I moved for like years. You know, like I would get people calling me outside of my studio in Brooklyn, like 2 years after I moved, to be like, hey, Jess, are you around? I happen to be in Greenpoint. And I'm like, I haven't been there for like 18 months, you know? And it made me see that like people actually aren't paying that close of attention to you. Like we pay so much attention to like what we put out in the world and how we feel other people perceive us. But all you have to do is just put out a little something every now and then, and people have this perception that you're like the world's busiest person. So like, again, like I'm really of the understanding that you can disappear from Earth for 2 to 3 years and people mostly won't notice, you know, like, you know, so that was sort of the thing also with the pilot thing. I'm like, take time, like be a parent, don't flip out, just like do something creative so that you don't feel like you've totally lost yourself in parenting, because it is really tough to like get back into it and get the ball rolling again. If you like completely drop off of it, you feel really disconnected from everything. But all you have to do is like lightly pay attention to what's going on, do creative projects every now and then, you know, just like keep it going, just keep it going low level. So then when you're ready to ramp it up, you can just pop right back up instead of having to figure out how to like turn on a cold car in the middle of winter, you know?
Yeah, no, that's such a great way to say it. And I think one of the things that I've loved, especially in your social media presence, is seeing all of the ways that you're experimenting with these new tools and maintaining all of these little creative practices that it might not be within the traditional realm of communication design. I see your Vandercook. I'm wildly jealous. It's amazing. And the laser cutter and all of these other things. I'm curious if you have any new tools that you've been playing with and how they're informing the way you're thinking or how you're being creative in your professional practice too.
Well, it's been like one of the things for acquiring tools is like, I'm definitely like super like this, where if I get new technology, I'm suddenly really excited to do a thing on it. And so it's like you spend money in order to be creative, basically have like a creative boost, which is like You know, it's hard to admit, but it's absolutely true. It stopped happening for me with computers. That used to be my thing with computers when I was younger, where every time I got a new like MacBook Pro or whatever, I'm just like, look at me, I'm a professional designer. And now it's just like a pain in the butt to get a new computer, and I just wait as long as humanly possible. But with all the other tools, it's like a lot of times the tools that you have will kickstart an idea for something. It's why guitarists have a lot of different kinds of guitars. Like, you know, you're a guitarist. Why do you need like 7 guitars? And it's because every guitar makes a slightly different sound, and hearing those sounds will like trigger something in you to write a song. You'll be like, oh, like the way that that sounds, that makes me want to write this kind of thing. And so like being able to experiment on different machines can trigger work in a way that, you know, just working in the same way constantly doesn't. And so like a lot of the like having different art making methods and machines was like, how do I kickstart myself to work in different ways or work on different kinds of projects? Like the Vandercook is like easy because I can just like literally take my like vector art and translate it to plates and make prints, and it's great. It's like amazing, you know, like it's so cool to see your work in this like really tactile way, and to have people be able to own your art but not have it be paintings, which would be like so prohibitive for me because I would never be able to like make enough money off paintings to like justify ever selling them. I would be that person that just hoards them forever, and then I die and they end up in the trash heap or something. And so all of these different things that I have, just like, and they make a spark for me to make a thing. So I the laser cutter basically was able to justify itself immediately from those You Are Enough mirrors that I made, because I had an idea that I wanted to make this project. And I was like, if I can make a thing that sells enough that I can pay for the device that makes it, then it's worth it. You know, so that's sort of how I see all of these things that I acquire. I'm like, I have to make a thing that makes at least enough money to pay for the thing itself. And then after that, it's all gravy, you know? So I have the Vandercook. I have a really good Epson printer that I've had for a long time, but I don't do a ton of G-Clay prints, but I want to do more of them now that my mom lives here in California and I can ship them a little more easily. I've got my Glowforge laser cutter. I've got a desktop CNC router for cutting metal because laser cutters can't cut metal. And so that one's like a Nomad 3. I love it. It's like a little guy, and it's mostly for me doing jewelry and like smaller metal stuff. I have an Orion Impulse mini arc welder. And that was really because I made a bunch of necklaces that I still haven't put on my website because I'm terrible at putting things on the internet. And I had to hire a jeweler to help solder all the jump rings so that the chains wouldn't immediately pop off. And it was like such a pain in the butt, and it took like a year to get them to like prioritize me. And so I was like, F this, I'm going to get my own little welder and I'm going to solder my own jump rings. And so I got that, and it's like this magical machine where you just like zinc and it like makes a little solder weld. It's so cool. And what else do I have? I got a airbrush that I haven't used yet because I want to do edge painting. I have a bunch of like super random stuff now. I feel like I got another, oh yeah. And the rug gun. So that one I don't own, but a tufting gun. So one of my Kat who works for me, her good friend, Miles, had a tufting gun, and she was like, Miles is going to let us borrow the tufting gun so we could play with it at the office. And now I'm just like, I got to get all the things stuff together. It's so fun. It's like so satisfying to like make things like physically with your body. So yeah.
Have you made tufted letters? Do you have fuzzy letters?
I know I'm going to do it. But I was like, let's have this really ambitious first project be a lettering thing. And I started trying to use it, and I was like, wow, making a straight line is really hard. You know, so I was just like, now I'm still I feel like I've got a hang of it. I can like make it do things. So my next thing that I make that's not like a wonky smiley face or whatever is going to be something lettering related. But, and then part of this is I've been able to justify a lot of these things too, because my office, which is what I'm in right now, below it is my workshop. And that's where all my Tinker stuff is. And then right next to the workshop is a storefront space. And it's been my dream to have like a storefront at some point. It's why I had a storefront space in San Francisco, but then I never did it because it was like, would have been weird to have like only the front half be a store while I'm working in the back, and you just get really distracted. Here, right. It's like the perfect situation because I work upstairs and the store is downstairs. So I can have office hours in the store but it makes it really easy to justify having these art making tools for making like one-offs or things that I wouldn't want to put on the website, because if you put something on a website, you have to photograph it, you have to like, get it all zhuzhed up for putting on the internet, and then all for like having to ship it and like all this stuff. And sometimes things get lost and sometimes things break, and that's really stressful. So I wanted to be able to sell things that I was like, I'm going to make one rug and that's it. And if you're here that day, you can buy it. And if not, like whatever. So when the store opens, all my experimental random stuff will end up in it. So
well, I love the idea of having a straight line be really difficult, because I feel like as someone who has perfectionist instincts, like to not be able to achieve that opens up and unlocks a whole different kind of creative process, which is really important.
Yeah. I mean, I'll be real though. Curvy lines are much more difficult. It's all difficult. But then once you get the hang of it, it's like, oh, okay, I now understand that I just have to like push way harder than I thought I was going to or whatever.
Wonky, fuzzy letters. These are going to be 70s Muppet letters. They will be amazing.
Yeah.
I want to make sure we are at 2:00. And I know you said you could stick around for a minute or two after. So I want to just make sure I go through the questions and we can ask a few of them. Lots of love in the comments, people saying that they give your books for all of the baby showers they go to. And Bianca asked a question early on that I think is a really great one. So I'm going to read it out. She said, it's really nice to hear of your early experiences with reading, as it resonates with my own similar reading experiences too. Not being a fast reader, therefore the motivation to complete books falls behind, but still have that fascination with books, book design, and typography. How do you handle / overcome bringing book cover projects to that successful finish line with that roadblock? This is something I find myself struggling with from time to time.
So one thing that I've noticed for book cover projects is that you really don't have to read the whole book if there's resources available for understanding like the narrative arc and the plot and that kind of thing. Like for a lot of these classic books, there's just so much out there that you can read of like summaries and people writing like articles and theses about them and whatever, which I find to be much easier to read. But I do feel like you have to read at least a third of the book in order to get the tone correct. And so for when I was working on that Penguin Drop Caps project, I was working on 3 books at a time. So I'd have to like read 3 books simultaneously. And that would be like, the art would be due at the end of like about a month and a half. So like maybe like 8 to 10 weeks. So me reading 3 classic books in a like less than 2-month period was like really difficult. I'm a much better reader than I was, but I'm like not a speed reader. I read at the pace of narration, which can be nice. And I've become like a much better read aloud person just from like reading to the kids. And I feel like I've become a better reader just by practicing, by reading to my kids a lot more. But that's really my trick, is like, you don't need to learn how to speed read. You don't need to learn how to do a lot of these other things. Just read at least a third of the book to get like the tone and vibe right. And then read whatever resources that publishers provide you or whatever is available on the internet to get like the full plot, so that you're not like accidentally missing out on some major moment in the book or whatever.
Yes. Spoiler alert, we're ruining something important.
Yeah, exactly. You don't want to like spoiler alert it, and you also don't want to be like the most like stereotypical person on whatever it is. Like it's sort of like how when you were in high school, you could tell like who read the Spark Notes and who actually read the book, because whoever read the Spark Notes would just like write about the most basic thing. And whoever read the book would like talk about some nuanced character development, something, you know.
So a lot of the questions that have come in are about how to break into being a children's book illustrator. Like, how does somebody who's new as a designer or an illustrator find a way into that space? Do you have any recommendations?
One big recommendation would be to join the Society of Children's Books Writers and Illustrators. It's like the SCBWI. They are all over the US and they have different chapters in different cities. And they do a bunch of like community building stuff and a lot of seminars about things. And that would be like a really useful way to do it. You could also talk to literary agents that specialize in children's book stuff, just to sort of like get the ball rolling with it. For me, for pitching your own kids' books, my real entranceway was doing book covers at all. Like having an in at an art department at a publishing house made it so that when I wanted to actually pitch my kids' books, I just reached out to my art department contacts and were like, hey, I know that you guys don't work on kids' books, but can you pass me along to the kids' book people? I would love to show them this thing I'm working on. And so just having any sort of in at a publisher is great. You know, like if you know for a fact that you're like, I want to be a kids book author, illustrator, or whatever, and that is like burned into your soul, like get a job as a designer at a publishing house, you know, like get those publishing contacts from the get out. Publishing jobs don't pay the best, but they can be really rewarding. And that is really like the tightest in that you can have, is just like knowing authors, knowing the people that publish things, knowing literary agents, things like that. So just like try to find your back door into actually having someone look at your stuff. And then joining up with the Society of Children's Book Writers and Illustrators is a handy thing.
That's great advice. That's a good resource to know about as well. One question that came through, I think a lot of them are related, and I'm so sorry we're not going to get to all of them for the people in the audience. But somebody asked about the Neiman Marcus work that you've been posting lately a lot. Do you want to talk about that project a little bit and the gorgeous work that's come out of that collaboration?
I have like a whole wall of it here now. Like that is like literally this whole bottom shelf is all my Neiman Marcus stuff. And there's even more of it because I went crazy like with buying stuff. I didn't want to wait because a lot of times I'm sure there's designers in the crowd that this resonates with, but you'll work on a project and like the person that you worked with like never actually tells you when it launches and never sends you samples. And then you're like, oh wait, I should probably get samples from that thing like a year later. And they're like, we can't find any in our warehouse. And so there's been a few projects that I've worked on that I just don't have samples for because someone forgot to even tell me that it launched, which is so sad. So in this case, I knew that it was like, I reached out to them when I started seeing the work appear on Neiman Marcus because they hadn't reached out to me yet. And I was like, oh, look, I saw that a bunch of the stuff is launching. Like, do you guys like, are you guys going to send me stuff? Are you guys like, am I going to get a discount or whatever? And it was like days and days of not hearing back about it. And they were like, we'll talk to so-and-so, like, we'll get back to you about it or whatever. And I got so nervous because I know that this stuff can sell out, like the Neiman Marcus stuff can sell out. So I just spent like $3,000 on their website, just like buying my own samples just to be like, I need to have it. Which is, you know, whatever, business expense, it is what it is. But it was an interesting project. I've actually done work for Neiman Marcus before. They hired me to do a holiday ornament several years ago. I think it was in 2012 that it was so cool because they made it like, they do like a annual holiday ornament and it was a gift tag that had my lettering on it. And it was made out of like silver plated. It was really pretty, you know.
What did you call that? The ooh, shiny thing syndrome? I really like that.
You know, anytime physical objects that get made out of my work, I like lose my mind. I may as well just lay on the floor and not get anything done for the rest of the day. It's like crazy. And so, and then they ended up actually licensing a bunch of my drop caps on some of their popcorn stuff a year after that, but I never got samples for it. I never even saw it happen because it was like, here, like, we want to use these, but then they never like sent me anything when it was done. And then later I was like, oh yeah, didn't we do this before? And then I found some images online and I reached out to them and be like, can you send me that? And they just weren't any left because it was years ago. So this time they reached out and it took a while to like sort of figure out what the project was and was going to be because the asks shifted a lot as we were talking about the contract. So it wasn't 100% clear from the get out that it was like going to be what it was. It was like, they wanted to do like their popcorns and candies or whatever. It was like, we've got 7 tins plus we've got these 17 products and we want to put your art on it. So because of that, we want you to do custom work on these tins and then assets that we're going to use on other things. And I was like, okay, great. So they hired me to do like 5 characters, which were like bigger illustrations, and then a handful of spot illustrations, and then a custom alphabet that was like my fancy daily drop caps. And so as we start, I did doing all this art, and then they're like, oh yeah, and then this is actually, that's not going to go on the tins, that's going to go for third-party people. And I was like, what? We didn't talk about that. So I got a better understanding about what the project actually was kind of down the line, because really what it is like they do a lot of this stuff in-house or they hire an agency that just does everything. So I was like kind of a hybrid where they were working on it in-house, but hiring me to do a lot of the artwork creation. And they were just so used to working with people that would just take the whole project and just do everything for them, or they would do everything and just have like a handful of like easy assets to work with. And so it was really a very big hybrid because I was very involved in the design of a lot of stuff too. And so when I found out that the stuff was for third-party use, I was like, well, what's it going to go on? And they were like, we don't really know, because what they do is they make like a brand book of all the assets and just sort of share it with all their partners and are like, hey, like, here's these things we commissioned. What do you want to use them for? Like, take them, have fun or whatever. And so even they don't really know what it's going to be until they start getting the samples back from people. So I knew they were going to make socks and like maybe something else. Like but I had no idea they were going to do all the stuff they did. And it was like, so as soon as I started seeing it, I like literally lost my mind. I've never had this experience with a project before in my entire life. You know, like there's been projects that I've had like crazy, awesome, like reveal, fun, like launch experiences for, like when Moonrise Kingdom came out. I couldn't go to like the premiere or whatever because I wasn't important enough. But my friends and I, what we did was we basically almost rented out the Kabuki Theater in San Francisco, which is like this art house theater in Japantown. So I bought like 40 tickets and we just filled the theater with my friends and we all went to go see it together. And then we stayed through to the credits, and when my name went up on the screen, everybody was cheering and I was like crying. It was crazy. So like this Neiman Marcus experience was like on par with that. When I started seeing, they sent me a list of all the products with links to them. And I was like, what? There's a cookie jar. What? There's this. What? There's that. And I just like I was ruined for the whole rest. I like for the week I was ruined. So, and then I impulsively spent $3,000 to buy everything. It was crazy. And so, but it's been like a real delight. And the main thing that really like flipped me out is like, sometimes you make work and you understand the impact that the work will have on people. And I feel like, you know, when you're making stuff for like to sell candy or like whatever, you don't think about it that much. You're like, oh yeah, like I'm engaging in capitalism. It's great, whatever, you know, it's fun to make fun work or whatever. But when I saw the cookie jar, and they made a cookie jar that is, I'll go get it actually, because I got to show it to you. It's crazy.
Okay.
They took my drawings and made a cookie jar out of it. I got to get it to focus on it. I have to put it right near my face, maybe. Sorry, it doesn't want to focus. So this was a drawing that I did of Santa, and drawings that I did of presents, and a drawing that I did of a tree that looks like a tree that my grandma had when I was growing up. And they turned it into a cookie jar. And I like just started crying because I was like, I could just see, like, it just reminded me so much of this ceramic tree that I had growing up with my grandma. And I was like, this is going to be an object that like means Christmas to people. And that's bonkers. Like, you know, it's not often that you get that experience when you're like, wow, my work is actually going to have like generational impact.
Right. It will be part of someone's tradition. It's going to be part of what they associate with fond memories. That's wonderful.
So cool. So that's the story of that project. And
congratulations. Well, you have been so generous with your time, and I know we have gone over a lot, and I would love to keep talking, but other people I'm sure also have other things they need to do. So I want to say thank you so much. Thank you to everyone at the ICA. Thank you to everyone at AIGA Boston for coordinating this fantastic event. It's been such a pleasure to get to talk to you. And I hope that we get to do it again one day.
You too. This was so fun.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.